Today we're visiting with Mary Witt. She's a longtime member of Hope United Methodist Church. And Mary's going to tell us a little bit about her experiences at Hope Church. Mary, tell me how you found this church in the first place.
Okay, well, in 1978, my late husband Jeff and I moved to Colorado. He had just gotten out of the service and the Air Force, and he had gone to the Air Force Academy. And he said, we've got to live in Colorado, you're going to just love it. And so we bought a house in this Arapahoe Lake area. And one of my mother's departing words when we took off, she said, find a church, you're going to find your friends there. And that was so true. So anyway, we got here. We went to Grace United Methodist. We went to Trinity, actually, downtown. And then we found this church opening on the corner of Bellevue and Dayton, and it was a mile and a half from our house, so it was perfect.
And your family was young at that time?
Yeah, we had, JJ was about 3. I was pregnant at the time with Ben, and I guess we joined in August, and he was born in November of that year. And then later Kristen came along. But yeah, they were little guys.
Well, back in '79, was Al Brown the pastor?
Oh, yes, Al Brown and Victor Schultz.
Yep.
And Vic was the one that came to our house and encouraged us to join, and he was the visiting minister, and he was the shepherd, I think, gathering the flock. So anyway, we did join, and I remember sitting on the front step with him and saying, he said, oh, we've got a great choir, and I said, well, I was a music major, and Jeff said, well, you need to start singing again, and everything just seemed to fit, so.
Do you remember anything about Al Brown?
Oh, good old Al. I mean, salt of the earth, just everyday message. He was one of those that kind of related, good old boy that related to everybody, and you'd always take something from that service home or sermon home, and he was good. He was the perfect fit for that first pastor.
Yep. Well, you mentioned a little bit about your music training. Tell us a little more about that.
Well, I was a music major at the University of Minnesota, mostly voice, and
Go Gophers.
Yeah, go Gophers. Yes, I'm still a Gopher fan, and a Minnesota Viking fan. But anyway, I did join the choir when I was 29, so that was a few cantatas ago.
Well, and at one time, didn't you handle the children's choir?
Yes, I did. Early on, I had the 3rd through 6th grade choir, which was called the Rainbow Choir. And it really was a great time of life for me, I think. And, our kids were young, and all my kids went through that. But it was a great way to learn, to get to meet young parents and the young children of the church. And at one time we had 35, I remember, on the roster. We did several musicals, Music Machine twice, David and Goliath, Fat Jehoshaphat.
With these young people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kids.
Yeah, we put them on at the end, these musicals on at the end of the year. And it was a great time.
Well, and you also made some good friends with Sally Robertson and Ruth Most.
I did, yeah. Like my mom said, you'll find your best friends there. They became my best friends, and along with, I can't even start naming all of that group of people, but of course with Sally and Ruth, we formed a perfect blend. That actually started at church. Nancy Duncan and Clay Hill he was SPR and she was his cohort, and it was coming up on the annual meeting, and they wanted to change it up, and so Nancy rewrote the words to Operator and asked Ruth and Sally and I to do it as a trio, and we had so much fun. We just continued with 40s music. It was wonderful.
And the three of you sang at Sharon and my rehearsal dinner, or
Yes,
dinner
we
after
did.
our wedding.
Yes.
I remember that very well.
Yeah,
And those are still your friends today.
they are.
Yep.
However, they're not at the church anymore, so I do miss them. But
But you're still active in the choir.
I am.
Yep. Are there other people that you remember from the music department or the
Well,
choir?
of course, Barb Blair was our first music director, and she grew up in Minnesota too, so I had just an affinity for Barb and Jim, her husband, and she loved the St. Olaf Choir and classical traditional music, so we had a lot of good music that we sang. We had a wonderful choir, a men's section to die for back then. Yeah,
It was a lot of fun.
good days. Yeah, and we had Paul Smith as a director. He was wonderful. Yeah, we,
Well, in '79, the church was meeting in what now is the Schultz Fellowship Hall. That was the building.
right.
And the choir kind of came and went, or would go up, and I believe there were 2 risers or something, but it was
Yeah.
not really a choir loft.
Yeah, there was some type of risers up there, and as I remember, well, for many years, I know Margaret in particular, Hankins, always wanted the choir there, so we sang 2 services, and I believe back in that day, we did 2.
Yeah.
I think so. So, we were busy.
I could remember putting the chairs down and everybody'd sit, and then when it was over, we'd move the chairs back and do something else
Yeah.
in that one space, so it was a different time altogether.
Yeah.
Well, after that, Al Brown was there. Richard Vickery, do you remember Dr. Vickery? Do you have memories
I
of
do,
him?
and I saw, for some reason, so Dick Vickery came after,
Al Brown,
oh, yes, I do remember Dick, for sure. And then Sam came after him.
yes, and then Sam Day.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I recall Dr. Vickery is a little stiff,
Yeah.
particularly compared to Al Brown, who was, as you mentioned, kind of a man of the people.
Yeah, it was just kind of a, I don't know.
Personalities are very
Yeah.
different. Well, tell us what you remember about Sam Day.
Well, he too, remember he had those sermons where he had 3 things, always 3 things in his sermon title, you know. I don't know, I can't think of it right now, but it was things to think about throughout the week as well. I do remember one sermon, he said, if you don't remember anything from the Bible, just remember Jesus loves me. I do remember that.
And you were singing in the choir and participating in the music at Easter and cantatas and Christmas
Yeah.
during those days.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned Margaret Hankins. She followed Sam Day as the first female senior pastor that we had at Hope. What do you remember about Margaret?
Oh, I love Margaret. Yeah, she and John Lee and Steve Miller, I would say too. They came at a time that when I really needed a minister. And I think when life goes on and you think things are okay, maybe you don't need to be that close to God or that close to the church or whatever, but when tragedy hits, you need something to hold on to. And I don't know if we wanted to talk about this now, but we might as well.
Sure.
But in 1996, my husband, whose family is genetically inclined for bipolar, took his life. I think he had just had enough of life. And I had a son in college at that point. Ben was a senior at Creek, and Kristen was a freshman. And we went through a very difficult time, and then 2.5 years later, on top of that, my oldest son, JJ, died as well. So to pull me through those times, sometimes I can't even remember how awful I felt, but it was bad, and I knew I could always turn to Margaret for some calming advice, and John Lee became a dear friend and really helped me through that difficult time. So not only that, but the entire church, that's where the community of the church to me came together, and my friends became dear, dear friends, and they lifted me up when I couldn't lift myself up. And then, I know it's a cliche, but time heals, and things kind of, your spirit has to heal or you can't go on. So.
It's also example to me as how sometimes the outward appearance is not really what's going on. Because my view of Jeff was this bright, young, successful, high-achieving person, and to understand that he really had difficult time just coping with the world. And JJ, on the life in front of him with high ambitions that we all thought, the sky's the limit for this guy, and to lose both of them had to be such a terrible, terrible tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was rough, Charlie.
Yes, that was a tough time.
And I think, I'm obviously not alone in losing a child at church. But it's has to be the hardest thing of human life, I think,
Yeah.
losing a child.
Margaret and John Lee were co-pastors for a while, and then Steve Miller was co-pastor with Margaret for a while. You remember Steve and
Correct.
His wife Lissa?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
what do you remember about them?
Well, I did a class with Steve, and one of the things that we worked on was the grace of God, which always, because after this happened, it's, by the grace of God, that saying, I kept saying to Steve, where was the grace of God for my family, for my son, for my husband? So anyway, as I recall, the grace of God is the guidance, his guidance. So I do remember that class, and I can't remember, we had a workbook, and it was good.
But still, Steve helped you
Yes.
go through that and work on those? Do you remember Steve Warren, who followed after those earlier preachers?
I do.
Do you remember anything particular about Steve Warren?
Well, I remember that he wasn't always at church on time. I do remember that.
We all have our peculiarities.
Well, Margaret would have had that taken care of by now.
Yes.
But you know how the choir goes. But anyway, he did have a good sense of humor. I remember he's a beekeeper.
Yes.
And he's still, he's got some pretty funny things on Facebook still that I kind of follow. So.
Yeah. And he was followed by Dale Beck. You remember Dale Beck?
So Dale Beck came after him, or was it Russ Brown?
He came after Steve Warren.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember Dale. He was good.
Yeah,
He
I liked him.
retired to Estes Park.
Yes. I have a favorite picture of him where several of the teenagers were sitting on the floor in the fellowship hall, and he just came out and sat down with them. And I thought, that's really unusual.
Yeah.
My instincts would have been to stand there and talk to them, but he sat down with them
Yeah.
on the floor, and I thought, that's probably a better way to do
Yeah,
this.
that's probably something you would have done,
I don't know.
actually.
That,
But I think Dale and Russ were both ministers that were here to heal,
yes.
just in an interim position. And I was kind of hoping Russ Brown might,
Yes.
get that moving forward and stay.
Yeah, and Russ Brown was only there for the summer. He came
Oh, that's right.
for a 3-month period, I think. They were waiting for either Steve Warren to finish a education requirement or something, I don't know, and then come there. But he was just there for 3 months, but it was sort of a time of healing, I think, when he came.
Yeah, hope has needed a little time of healing here and there.
Yeah, like human beings. I
Yeah.
think you're right. The growth of the
Absolutely.
church has been that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And then Don Bird, you remember Don Bird?
Oh, I love Don. Yeah,
He was with us for 6 years and then went on to Broomfield.
yeah.
Yep.
I think he,
What are some of your memories of Don?
oh, well, he was, as was Steve Miller, quite an actor.
Yes.
And Steve, went on to do acting at Westcliff, but I remember Don doing, like, one year he was Joseph at the Christmas Eve service. And he was really, really very good at it. Good sermons, and I think he was a strong leader.
And after Don Bird, we had Claire McNulty Drews. You remember her?
Yes, I do. I really felt like maybe I didn't get as close to her as I would have liked, or if she'd been there a little longer, that would have happened. But she seemed like the perfect fit for our church. And it's so unfortunate that she had the health issues and had to move on. And then COVID happened, so she probably could have stayed anyway. And
That was a tough time, actually.
Yeah.
Her personality was very inclusive. She seemed to welcome everyone, and people warmed up to her very easily, I think.
Yep. I think she was very real and genuine, and she wore cowboy boots to preach in, but she was a great preacher.
Yep. And our current pastor, Reverend Lynn Cheek.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Mel golfs with Brian quite a bit.
Oh, does he? Good.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. And yeah, I mean, I think she's obviously a real lover of the choir and is going to sing in it
Yes.
this fall, and which is great because we can always use another voice, and a good voice. She's very musical. So it's great.
Yep,
It's good
I
to
agree.
have her. As is Ken.
Yeah. You mentioned the music department and the children's choir and the perfect blend. Can you tell me a rough estimate of how many weddings or funerals you've sung at over the years?
Well, when I was younger, it was weddings. And ironically, after what I went with my loss and my grief, I started singing at funerals. And, I keep the bulletin from each person that I sing for, and I probably have a stack about like that. And some days I just go through them. I take it very seriously, and I just hope, that I have brought some comfort to them in that position, in their grief. So,
You certainly have. I remember you singing at Sharon's mother's funeral, and what I admire about you is when we called to ask you, you didn't hesitate.
yeah.
You said, I could do that.
Yeah. Although I have to say, it's, I am now unfortunately 73 years old, and it's not quite as easy as, I'm not doing it as much, so it makes it a little harder, but.
Well, and your voice register is a little lower
yeah.
than some of those songs that they ask you to sing. It's like, well, let's see how we're going to do this.
Exactly. Luckily, we've got this great pianist and organist, Cheryl, who I adore, and on the organ she can set it to any key that I want it in, and if it's an easy, a familiar song, she'll just play it in whatever key.
Well, that's what I admire about you and Cheryl, that you have the knowledge and the ability to do those things, because I don't understand that, but I love listening to it, and I love it when you sing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, tell me what other things you've done at the church. Have you been involved in committees or social groups?
Well, actually, it's been, I think, kind of early on. I decided committees weren't really my deal, and I think that's important as I mean, I don't think everybody has to be in a committee, but I did find my place in music. I've been on the music committee. I'm right now on the worship design committee. But overall, I've been on lay leadership, but I would say I'm best in the choir loft.
One of the things I learned from Marla Cowers was one of the associate pastors, and she did a seminar or a group study or something on your talents. And one of the things I learned that we all have different talents. And if you don't have a talent for something somebody's asking you to do, it's okay
Yeah.
to say, that's really not my strength. Because I always thought if somebody asked, you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't want to, or you didn't have the skills, or you didn't have the right temperament for that particular job. And it really gave me permission to kind of say, no, I don't think that's my talent or my strength, and be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. And, you know, I actually say that to my grandkids, you know, if they get down, well, I can't do that or whatever. But, you know, everybody's different. And so maybe you can't do that, but you can do something else somebody else can.
Absolutely, yes,
So.
I think so. Well, you've seen some growth and then also some diminishing of the membership at Hope over the last 47 years.
Yes.
What would you like to see the Hope Church do in the next 47 years?
Oh, you know, I do long for the day where you could barely get a seat at Hope. And those were, you know, Sam Day days and early
Yeah.
Margaret John days. And how we, you know, get people in the pews is, you know, our mission, I guess. You know, I don't know exactly how.
We've talked a little bit about the importance of the church and that community of faith in your life. Do you have a particular thing that you like best about Hope Church?
Yeah, I would say that. What my mother said was, you'll find your friends there, and I look at my closest friends, they all came from Hope. And they are all either there now or have left because they've, you know, left. Sally went down to Cripple Creek, you know, Ruth lives across town now. So there are reasons that they've left, but remaining are still my closest friends. So that's, you know, and I think it's not just in my life. I hope that I am a good friend and a supporter of their ups and downs in life, and
Certainly,
so.
I think you have been. Well, we talked a lot about what the church has meant to you and some of the special people. Have we left out anybody or any other special things you remember about your experience at Hope?
Let's see. Well, you know, some of the fun things we used to do, but maybe have gone by the wayside. You know, we'd have talent shows, and we'd remember Peggy Hansen and Merlin Bender, and they would kind of do their announcements in the
Yes.
morning, which, you know, maybe would be kind of hokey now, but it sure was fun and you know, uplifting those days. They were kind of a comedy team. Yeah, I mean, I think I've kind of covered my 43 years at Hope.
I think so too.
Okay.
Mary, we appreciate very much you sitting for this interview, and thank you for your service and your dedication to the church.
And thank you, Charlie, for all you do, for sure.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.